Hey everybody, David here. Welcome back to Red Pill News. This evening I have a special guest, attorney Ken Good from Smith County in Texas, and we are going to be discussing the failed criminal justice reform and the implications of that in America. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Good briefly and then we will have our discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show tonight. This is a very important topic for our country, and it's a topic that I've spent a lot of time and energy with, and it's one that I have a lot of knowledge about. I'm an attorney in Texas. I specialize in bail law, and I have argued several important cases before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court for criminal cases in Texas. And I represent bondsmen. I'm on the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, their board of directors. And these are the type of issues that we've had to educate ourselves because there's just been so much misinformation about criminal justice reform. And for so many years, we were hearing, oh, these are things are working when we knew they weren't. So we had to become experts and be able to talk about these issues with our elected officials. And that's what we've been doing. And that's what we're continuing to do is educate people on these very important issues so that we will make the system better instead of continuing to make it worse.
That's great. And it's great to have you. I appreciate you coming on. You're someone that actually has experience, has the knowledge. So tell us a little bit about this trend of criminal justice reform, how it got started, and how the results have not been what people anticipated, or some people.
Well, we've had these, the bail industry's been around for 200 years, and we've had some pushes in the past about we need to get rid of the bail industry. The problem is there's no other release mechanism that works as well as the bail industry. I mean, you could
Mm,
do a whole show on why that is, but I mean, the bail industry has a failure to appear rate of less than 10%. Everything else has a failure to appear rate twice, three times, four times worse than that. And that's really important in the criminal justice system because courts don't have time. And anything that stops their case, it has to be put on hold. It has to be put on hold when somebody misses court until they come back because that's the constitutional requirements. You can't punish them without them being there. So we have
mm,
ended up, if we end up waiting for people, and if 50% of the people on the docket fail to show up, then we're putting 50% of the cases on hold. And if we do that for very long, then we have chaos and we have to dismiss cases because otherwise they can't get resolved because we're continuing to add cases. What we had was this push to change things, and we had some, I would say some misinformation where we're saying, look, people will want to show up, people want to come to court, so that we don't need bondsmen. And we found out very quickly, like during the pandemic, that without the private industry, without somebody holding little Johnny's hand, people do not come to court. And if they don't come, it's great damage to the criminal justice system. And we've seen that over and over and across the country. And it's caused a lot of jurisdictions to repeal these bad reform measures that they were talked into doing.
hmm. So has this push primarily been in the past 10 years, would you say? I feel like just in media in general, I've heard the past 5, 6, 7 years that crime has increased, more people have been released.
I think it's been in the last 5 or 6 years that we've seen this push. You can go back to at first there was a push for, oh, we don't need bondsmen, we can automate it, we can replace it with a risk assessment tool that will just give the court a score, and it will tell people, tell the judge whether this person should be released or held. And that turned out to be hogwash. In fact, all the biggest digital companies in the world did
Hmm.
a joint statement saying it a risk assessment should not be part of criminal justice reform, especially pretrial reform, because it has a racial element. It looks at your racial group in predicting what groups do, and so it has that element for an individual when you're predicting what they'll do. And while it's good, it has a good prediction rate for a group. It does not for an individual, and
Ah.
so that kind of went away. And then when they start talking about talking jurisdictions into replacing the bail industry. Well, once you do that, and you find out that doesn't work, well, are you going to admit that? Are you going to, in New Jersey, you're going to spend $100 million and you have a statewide tax increase for bail reform, and then it doesn't work. So are you going to admit that? No, they're not going to admit it. Once you do that, you're stuck with this failed system.
Wow, that's a great point. And, it makes me wonder there's so many mayors in New York City and Chicago. They're leaning in further into this despite the crime that just keeps going up. What's with that? Why are these mayors leaning into something that's obviously failing?
Well, you saw it really heavy at the end of the election that we just had in November. Just the week or 2 weeks before the election, they started saying this whole theory about crimes increasing is just not true. It's all a lie. And I thought, surely this is not going to have an impact in this election. I was hoping that this would be the first election where public safety overcame identity politics. But when they're saying they're all lying, and if you don't elect us, there's going to be civil war, identity politics won out once again over public safety. And so I think you could trace it back several cycles, probably four or five, where the party of the left used anger to say, you're being mistreated, you're not being treated fairly, you're being over incarcerated. And initially, it was just political rhetoric. They get elected, they get reelected because it did what it was supposed to do. It brought out larger groups of minorities because they were angry. But the problem is, after a while, their group started noticing they were not following through. So they started electing the true believers, which I would call maybe a little bit, off center crazies. And so they started doing what they promised. And the problem is, this is the result because it was all originally started as rhetoric, it wasn't real. And now it's creating chaos wherever these reforms have been attempted.
Yeah, and it seems that that did work. The emotional rhetoric, and politics has always had emotional rhetoric, but now it seems like there's not good policy at all behind the emotional rhetoric of we've got to let people out of jail to give them a second chance, even if they, you know, hurt somebody or committed violent crime. And that's the thing. So much of it is violent crime. It's not somebody, Johnny stole a chocolate bar from the gas station. It's career criminals given opportunity after opportunity. And it's kind of it to, I think, the average observer, it would be obvious. So,
Well, I think it's across the spectrum. You see in California where they've decriminalized crime, theft under $950, which is having a cascading impact. It's causing people to commit more crime and worse crime. But I mean, it's having an impact on the economy now. You have businesses that are closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting, and now it's getting to
mm,
the point you have businesses also closing because they can't provide a safe work environment in that area for their
wow.
employees. And so it just gets continually worse. And, we've seen during whether you want to call them protests or riots, where you had burning of businesses, a lot of those businesses did not come back. That has a terrible impact on the community because uh, they lose those tax dollars. And then what are they going to do? They've run off their businesses. They lose more tax dollars, and they have to. That doesn't hurt anybody but the people that are still living there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sad that you see businesses have to appease the woke mob. They have to put up, we support your movement, your cause here, signs in their windows when they close. And you wouldn't think it would be this divisive, this controversial, but apparently it is to some members of the woke left. And I think about, yeah, not just the violent crime, the property crime. As you mentioned, I've seen some videos where it's just huge mobs of people just run in and all at once, and there's no way that security is going to be able to stop 20 people, and they just clean out the store simultaneously.
Well, and who's doing that? Organized crime is coordinating that. Uh, Gangs, career criminals. They're posting on social media. Go here this time. Grab what you can. They meet up a couple of blocks away.
Wow,
They get it for pennies on the dollar, and then the next thing you know, it's on a website like Amazon Shopping, where
wow.
they're posting it and making money off of it. And it's so whenever we create a void where we're saying, well, we're doing these policies to protect the poor, the people that are stepping in to take advantage of it are the career criminals, the gang elements, and organized crime. And we've now tied the hands of law enforcement. We tied the hands of judges for maybe a noble cause, but now they can't even address real criminals, and that's what's really killing us. That's why you see crime going up.
Yeah, and I'm even seeing, I saw a news segment the other day, a gas station had hired armed guards to protect their customers. That's not only an additional expense to the business that they probably have to pass on to customers, but I even wonder in some of these states if you are the good person that is defending themselves, maybe you're concealed carry and it's clear that you did not instigate the situation, are you even safe, or is the criminal justice system went so far as to make the actual perpetrator the victim? Can someone defend themselves and have legal justification these days?
It's going to depend on where you live. Like in
Mm,
Texas, if you break into my house and you steal something, even if you're running away from me with it, I have the right in Texas to shoot you because I we have what's called the castle doctrine. But
ah,
that doesn't that principle doesn't exist everywhere. And
mm,
in our more progressive states, you don't have the right to protect your property. You have the right to defend yourself. So if somebody's running away from you with something that belongs to you and you shoot them, they would probably end up suing you because you have a house, you have a homeowner's policy. So you would have something for them to shoot at with their attorney. Uh, not really shoot at, but they would
yeah,
something for them to try to obtain,
sure.
and so you'd end up being sued back. So it just depends on where you live that we have these policies. You saw that in Florida. We had this uproar about a gentleman who stood up, stand your ground doctrine. Well, not every state has a stand
Oh
your ground
yeah,
doctrine, but some states do. And so, do I have a right to defend myself? You have to find out what your state says. Do I have a right to defend my property? You have to find out what your state law is. And it's going to be different in every
yeah,
state.
yeah. That would make, if I were living in some of the states that were, I would call them pro perpetrator almost. I would probably want to
Well,
move, or at
but
least
look
the
at,
cities.
say you live in a castle doctrine state and your prosecutor decriminalizes
Ah,
theft under $950. You break into my house, you're not going to be prosecuted. But I don't want you to do it, so I turn around and shoot and kill you. I will not be prosecuted for murder because I was doing what the law allowed me to do. So we're
yeah.
actually creating a situation where we're putting that defendant, that person, in a worse position than they would have been if we had just prosecuted them for theft.
Wow, that's a unintended consequence that I don't know that many's thought about, but that's so true. That's more damage, physical damage, potential property damage that just would not have occurred. So you would say that the increase in violent crime, it's not been exaggerated. It's not just a partisan talking point. It's real.
Absolutely. And it's not just the violent, it's all across the spectrum. It's real when Target comes out and releases a press release saying that theft is affecting their bottom line to the tune of $400 million. It is real when Walmart says that if our politicians don't change course, we're going to have to start changing. We're going to have to start closing stores because we're having record, unforeseen shoplifting. That's not sustainable. And then when you get a green light on the low crimes, it's like, the broken windows doctrine says if you want to really fight crime, you start with the low stuff, and then that'll discourage the big stuff. Well, when you're giving the green light on the low stuff, then they'll do the low stuff and they'll build up to the big stuff as well. And so it just cascades all across the criminal justice spectrum, and you'll have more severe crime as well because they, where do they stop? They
Yeah, that's
stop when
it.
they cross the line, and we make them stop.
That's it. Yeah. If you feel enabled on the small things, then you're likely going to feel like you can just do anything. If you're in that mindset, if someone who's already a criminal is
Well,
in
there's a
that,
story in the news from the last day about a politician in South America who is the most popular politician in this hemisphere. and he has like an 80% approval rating. And they're like, why? Why is he so popular? He came in with a promise to lower crime, and he did it. And the way he did it was he used the broken windows doctrine. And if you violated the law and you committed a crime, you were found guilty, and if you need to go to jail, you went to jail. And crime has gone down like 75%. So,
Wow.
we know how to fight crime. We know what to do. It's just we're not doing it. And because we have politicians that are refusing to allow and are putting governors, a governor on a car won't allow you to drive over a certain speed. We have politicians that are putting governors on law enforcement to prevent them from doing their job.
Yeah, and that's another element of it too, is this cultural pressure to not be uh, targeting minorities, to not be racist. And I'm not saying that that does not exist, but it's way blown out of proportion, and it's just this facade of you're automatically bad if you are too hard on someone or you hold someone accountable. It is all around, not just the laws. Now that I think about it, I hear so many police officers that have quit their jobs because they're like, look, I want to be able to see my family. I don't want to end up with a lawsuit. I don't want to end up in a bad situation. So it's kind of two sided. It's like it's pressure on both sides.
Well, you know, do we have a racial problem or do we have an inner city crime problem?
Right.
In our inner cities, schools have failed, families have failed. There's no job opportunity. Drugs are rampant, and that's kind of the thing we can't talk about. He who shall not be named is drug addiction and mental health issues. And so, do we really have a racist criminal justice system, or do we have an inner city crime problem where anyone that has any ability to move out has moved out, and what we have left is an inner city where we have a large number or bigger numbers of minorities stuck there because they can't get out. And they're being held prisoner by these failed systems. And is the real response that we should give up on the criminal justice system too? Just join all the failed policies that we've had? Is that the result? We're just going to wall off those cities and just write them off? Surely not. Surely not.
Yeah, I mean that is infuriating. Just think about that. Thinking about that in that context, it's like they're saying, okay, what we've done hasn't worked, but we're just going to release everybody and back into the community, and whatever happens, happens. That is not.
Well, I just get upset when people say, well, we already incarcerate too many people in the United States. That is absolutely not true. Our crime's increasing. As long as crime's increasing, we need to put more people in jail. And how can you say that we're putting too many people in jail when everybody in the world sends all their drugs to the United States? I mean, so we have a disproportionate amount of drugs to distribute and sell and to take advantage of people with. But we're saying that, oh, well, we shouldn't be putting all these people in jail. Drugs are the driving force for 80% of almost all crime. I mean,
Hmm.
if we just say, oh, well, we've lost the war on drugs, then we've lost the war on crime. We cannot give up that fight.
Wow. Wow. And I wonder how much of this, and I guess this would matter, the specifics of Arizona law or Texas law. I wonder how many non citizens who were bringing fentanyl, do they always get arrested and held accountable, or some of them been, taken back to Mexico and then they just do it again? They do it a second time.
we we have such an open border with immigrants coming through, or illegal aliens, what do you want to call them? We have an open border. We're not really stopping anybody to come through, and that is allowing organized crime to bring fentanyl through unabated. And so that's one of the problems that we're having. And you just look at that and you go, what would Joe Biden be doing any different on immigration policy if he was being paid off by gang members? If he was being paid off by the
Wow.
cartels to just look the other way, what would he be doing differently than he's doing right now?
Wow. That's a powerful statement, and that's true. Like it's been, he told a reporter the other day, they had asked him, "So do you intend to go to the border soon?" He said, "No, there's some more important things to take care of." I was just like, "Oh my goodness!" Let's look at this comment here. This is kind of interesting. George Gasson, District Attorney of Los Angeles, has stepped up his fight for prison reform. I'm not sure what that specific fight is, but
Well, George
Los Angeles.
Gascon is one of the DAs. He's an LA DA, but he's one of the ones that, you know, the DA is the voice of the victim in the courtroom. But, a year ago, his office said, well, we just have a disagreement over who the real victim is. And so when they're saying that, they're saying they think the defendant is the victim. And think about
Mm,
that for a minute. If DA Gascon is in the courtroom and he thinks the defendant's the victim, and the defense attorney is in the courtroom thinking the defendant is the victim, who is even arguing for the person who had the crime committed on, who we normally would say is the victim? There's no one arguing on their behalf. No
right.
one. And that's not the way the criminal justice system was intended to operate.
Yeah, so in that context, which is happening a lot, the actual victim is abandoned. I mean, there's no one there to fight for them. How scary it must be to live in a community and you're maybe violently assaulted by someone and they're let go the next day or within 6 hours and you hear they're out. I mean, I would be afraid to walk around in my, if they were in my neighborhood, I wouldn't want to go outside.
Well, what does that tell you about crime? Crime is already going up, but how much unreported crime do we have? And I think one of the untold stories here is, what is the resolution rate on the crimes that are being reported? It's going down. I mean, if
Hmm.
if the crimes that are being reported are only being resolved or closed 50% of the time, then how? I mean, if I'm living in that neighborhood, am I going to tell anybody else about the next crime? I mean, no, it's got a less chance of being closed, and they're still going to be walking the streets, and they're going to find out that I'm the one that told. So you're seeing reported crime go down, even though
Wow.
unreported crime is going through the roof, even as reported crime is going up, because the resolution of those crimes is going down.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's just a vicious cycle in the community. It sounds like. So, where do we go from here? What's the balance between the Joe Biden 1994 crime bill and where are we at now? Like, what is a good middle ground that would hopefully be acceptable to everyone, or maybe some people will never accept anything? I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, this is going to sound like it's completely off topic, but for a democracy to work, I think you have to have the consent of the losing people, the losing
Yeah,
party.
yeah,
And we're now in a point where the progressives are saying, if we lose, it was stolen. We're never going to consent to be governed. And in just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, right before the election, they were saying we will have war if you don't reelect us.
yeah,
So I don't know what the compromise is, if it's our way or the highway, and we think you're lying, and there's really not a crime problem. The good news is this is not sustainable. It cannot continue. We've had cycles like this before, not a cycle where it swung so far to the left so quickly, but we have had cycles of where we felt safe and we enacted policies to be more forgiving, which I would say is what happened at the start of this cycle. And now we're reaping the terrible things that happen when you release more and more criminals. Because when you release more criminals, you're going to have more crime, and we're finding that out once again. And when we tell somebody they will not be held accountable, and that's what we're doing, because we're saying we want to give you a second chance, but we're giving you a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, a fifth chance. Harris County, Texas, a 15th chance, a 16th chance. At some point, they realize I'm never going to be held accountable, so I can do whatever the hell I want. And that's
yeah.
when things get crazy. And that's where we're at. We have to stop it from getting crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it does feel like we're there. And is there, if someone is a minor property crime, are they immediately housed with like murderers or really violent people, or how does that work?
I would say minor crime right now, nobody's being held in jail, especially post pandemic. The jails are already full. They're already full of really dangerous people. And that's
Mm,
actually making the problem a little bit worse, because you don't have any capacity to hold even the minor criminals accountable. So if they decide not to come to court, it's very difficult to say, hey, I'm going to hold you in court, because the jail's already full, and
mm,
we can only hold you for so long. And if if everybody in jail figured that out, it'd just be complete utter chaos.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. There's so much messaging on the left that we want things this way, and we'll do whatever we have to do to make them this way, and it in some ways implicating extrajudicial, not or implying rather, not necessarily saying it at face value, but yeah, it's we're more divided than ever, and our criminal justice system for sure is getting out of hand. And I wonder, the same as I work in policy, I didn't think this would be the focus, the things that have been the focus the last few years. And you working in law probably didn't think that this, or maybe you predicted it, you had insight of attitudes, but I know 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought, I'm approaching my mid 30s, that this would be where we're at, where we're literally asking, why does this guy violently assault somebody and he's out in 2 days?
Well, 5 or 6 years ago, you never heard anybody say anything about criminal justice reform, bail reform. I mean, it all started out as bail reform. Bail bondsmen are the easy target. Everybody,
Mm,
nobody likes a bail bondsman. Um, and so, they started out with the easy target, but they started enacting policies that just were terrible. And they kept saying, "Oh, these are great. These are going to work. Give it more time." And now you're seeing all of these stories, story after story about crime is increasing and the failures. People are getting out so quickly. It's because these things that have been set up when nobody was listening have been utter failures, and it's really difficult to repeal and bring back reason when you've gone down
mm,
those roads. We've seen it happen. Alaska enacted some of these reforms and didn't like them, and they thought it was terrible. They brought them back and said, "What have you done to us?" And they repealed them. And you see that in other areas as well. But I mean, it's going to be difficult for California to go from,
mm.
we changed some felonies down to misdemeanors. Now we've just decriminalize crime under $950, a theft under $950. How do you rein that back in? They will ultimately have to, or they're going to
Yeah.
chase all their uh, retail sales stores out of the state. But so they will have to at some point.
Right, I agree with that, because you're seeing in census data there's a net negative, people leaving the states where it seems those policies are most prominent, and where law and the rule of law is most held, people are, it's a net positive, people are coming in. So with that, I know with a outsider's point of view, I can think of which states I say is doing best or worse. But what would you say? Who do you think? Not even states necessarily, either states or cities. Who do you think is doing best right now with a reasonable approach, and who do you think is doing worse?
Well, I think I would say that Florida is doing really well. I would say Texas, outside of Houston, is doing very well
Mm,
because Texas enacted a positive criminal justice reform with SB6, and I think it's a blueprint model for across the country. I think New York has done a terrible job. I think New Jersey did a terrible job when they enacted what we call the New Jersey plan. And I
mm,
think the king is probably going to be California. When you tell people that if you commit
mm.
theft under $950, you're fine, you're golden. That's just a transfer of property from the private industry to organized crime. And they say, oh, they passed it by saying, oh, we're helping the poor. No, you are helping organized crime, and the organized criminals, gangs, and they'll take advantage of the poor. They'll give them pennies on the dollar for it, and the money will be used to go buy drugs and alcohol, and it's not going to help anybody.
Yeah, yeah, I could see how that can be exploited. I don't want to forget about SB6. I want to hear more about that in just a minute. But I think of imagery, and you've probably seen the videos too in Los Angeles. It just looks like a third world country. I mean, there's so many people that are just so high on the sidewalks, they're out of it. And then there's casually always a fight in the background. And I feel like that might be the vision for all of America if these policies are not reversed. And you mentioned Alaska. I mean, that's good. At least that state reversed them. But with all that being said, talk about SB 6 a bit.
Well, SB 6, Senate Bill 6 in Texas, um, was major bail reform. It did three things. Number one, it required magistrates to review criminal histories before setting bail. And so we don't no longer do like New York has been
Hmm.
doing, where no matter how many times you're charged with the same offense, if it's on the list where you get released without a bond, then in Texas you'd be released on a PR bond in Houston anyway. So
Hmm.
we ended that. You are required to review criminal histories before setting bail, and that's the whole concept of criminal justice reform. You want to the person who has no criminal history, you want to treat them one way, and someone with a substantial criminal history, you need to treat them another way because they need more pressure to turn around. This whole concept that we need to treat everybody the exact same way is just completely contrary to our concept of criminal justice. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we did, we limited the use of free release, releasing them without bond or releasing them on a PR bond. And so violent offenses are no longer, a bunch of them are no longer eligible to be
What's a
released.
PR bond? Sorry to
A
interrupt. What's
personal bond, like in New
okay?
York, we would release them without bond. In
Okay.
Texas, we don't have anything like that, so you'd release them on a personal bond, which is a free bond. It's a government bond. And
Oh.
so we limited that use in Texas. And then the third thing that we did was we were the first state in the country that put restrictions on bail funds, charitable bail funds. And we didn't
Hmm.
limit the bonds they could post. We just required them to report whatever they posted. Indiana went
Ah.
further after that and restricted the bonds they could post. And the reason why is, all these bail funds raised substantial numbers of amounts of money on the premise that they were going to bail out poor people who were stuck in jail. Well, the problem is they found out those people aren't in jail. So who are they bonding out? They're bonding out the people that nobody wants to bond out because
Hmm.
they're the longtime drug dealers. They've already lost all their friends, or drug users. They've lost all their family. So nobody will bond them out. That's who we're finding that they're bailing out. And those people need to be in jail. And so you're starting to see other states even go further and put restrictions on them. But in Texas, we just did a reporting, just transparency. Tell us what you're doing, report it monthly, and tell us if they're failing to appear for court.
Yeah, that's nice to know who's paying and how much they're paying. I can't verify this, or I have not attempted, but I heard allegations a lot, and I believe it's true that the vice president had a fund. I don't know that she
She was one
started
of
it.
the first to recommend a charitable
Okay.
a bail fund. So she went on Twitter and said, "Hey, go contribute to this bail fund," and it
Ah,
raised substantial sums of money as a result.
wow. Wow, that's so damaging to the communities, with the irony that they want to help, or they say they want to help, but doesn't seem like that's we're on the path for that
Well,
at
the
all.
problem, they're destructive because some of them, their stated goal, this is what they say. I mean, one of them did an oral argument at the Court of Appeals on a federal lawsuit over the Indiana statute, and it was just Wednesday. And the first thing out of their mouth was, "Our stated policy is to try to get rid of the private industry bail system." And
Ah,
I mean, they're a charitable organization. They couldn't do what we do because they're only posting bonds for maybe 10% of the people.
mm,
80% of the industry or the market is being posted by the bail industry. I mean, they couldn't do it. And so what would they replace us with? Well, they're basing it on, well, we shouldn't be holding them anyway. We should just, they'll come. We don't need anybody to, all that's been disproven. So they're just creating chaos. And, Indiana just said, we're going to restrict what you do. And I think we'll find out whether that is constitutional to do that.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see when that gets taken, how far up it goes, and the judicial system. So, lastly, here, preventative detention. Talk about how the pendulum swings sometimes and maybe too far, and who's been advocating for preventative detention, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've during the criminal justice debate, we've had the pendulum swing very hard to the left, and it's like we shouldn't hold anybody. Uh, Everybody will come to court. Everybody's essentially a good person, even though in the Bible it says we're not good people. We're only good once we turn to God. So the now that we've kind of shown, or once we started realizing people are not showing up for court, the pendulum is starting to swing. And I would argue that if it swings too far to the right, the response to this, well, we're just going to hold you. We're
Mm.
going to hold you in jail until your criminal case is resolved, no matter how long that takes. And that is a concept that is completely contrary to our criminal justice system, and it dates back many, many years, all the way back to the Magna Carta, because the king, if he got mad at somebody, he would charge them with a crime and just never resolve it, and he would hold them just indefinitely. Well, the Magna Carta was the first document where the king agreed to place restrictions on his ability to do that. And that's really where we trace the roots of the bail industry.
Hmm.
Almost every constitution in every state has some form of that language where, like in
Hmm.
Texas, you can only be held for preventative detention if the Texas Constitution allows it. For capital murder would be a good example. Anything else, our Constitution says you have a right to bail with sufficient surety, which is a bond backed by the private industry. So almost every constitution in the country protects your right to release by the private industry. And so we're being demonized when we're your only guaranteed way of release. All of these others, release on personal recognizance, release on a personal bond, they've been litigated. They're not protected by the Constitution. They're just given by the legislature. And what they give, they can take away. And so, why are we attacking the private industry when it's the only guaranteed right they cannot take away from you unless you're charged with something really, really, really bad?
Hmm.
It's kind of you. I would argue they're doing it because they're setting it up for the future. We want to take away that right because we already know we can take away all the others.
Hmm.
So we get to preventive detention. The left is never going to be in favor of preventive detention. The right would normally be okay with it, except for the cost. The right is more fiscally minded, and so preventive detention is costly if we're just going to hold everybody until their case is resolved. And so the right would say, we can't afford that. We can't afford to hold everybody in jail. And so it ends up, I'm hoping that if it swings that way, both the right and the left come to the same conclusion, even if it's for different reasons.
Yeah, that we can meet in the middle. Even that language, I could see how that would be twisted by the left because it almost sounds like it's saying pre-crime confinement, but it's actually you've done something, you've been charged, but you just haven't had your trial yet.
Yes, but pretrial release has nothing to do with the presumption of innocence. Your right to release is based solely on the assurances that you give to the court that you will come back to answer your charges.
Aha.
So there's a whole bunch of factors they review to determine whether you should be released and what the amount of your bond should be in Texas. One of them is your ability to pay, but none of them is presumption of innocence, whether you did the crime. A
Interesting.
presumption of innocence is at the trial. This is what assurance are you going to give the court that you'll come back to answer the charges?
Interesting. That's I did not know that. I think most people probably do not know that. That's interesting. So, would you say that SB6 is a good baseline model for other states, or do you think it's unique to Texas? What do you think about that?
Well, the prosecutors that I've talked to over the last year thinks it's a game changer. They think it's working very well. But I think that the number one thing they see is reviewing criminal histories before setting bail. If your state is already doing that, then I don't know if it would be a game changer. Like in Texas, we have 254
Ah,
counties. And when you're arrested, up until SB6, you could review the criminal history in your county, but there was no database to really go to outside of DPS that you could easily check somebody's criminal history on, and so it was very difficult, and you didn't, and it wasn't a requirement of the law. The courts had ruled that you could, but there was no requirement. Now we have it required, and they had to set up a database system, an
ah,
infrastructure that would allow that to happen.
yeah. That sounds like that could be worth it, but probably costly.
Very, very expensive,
Yeah,
especially for a state the size of Texas.
yeah. I bet y'all. Were y'all 30 million, something
I
like
don't
that?
more than four.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about the somewhat unrelated, but how quickly y'all finish counting versus Arizona, despite at least four times as many people. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. I appreciate you joining me tonight. Would you like to leave any info? I know you represent the bondsman. Would you like to leave a website or anything for the audience? I'll put in the video description if you'd like for anybody to
Sure.
reach out.
Sure. If you want more information, you go to our website, pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important articles. We also have a podcast of our own. It's linked on our menu, but you could also go to thebellpost.com.
All right. Well, hey, great to have you, Mr. Good. We appreciate you sharing this info because we really need a good, just justice system, not one that has gone too far and treating the perpetrator as the victim. So I appreciate you joining me tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.